My name is Jeff Murphy, and I'm a member of the Career Programs team here in the Office of Alumni Relations at BU. Today's webinar is sponsored by BU Alumni Relations as part of our Alumni Career Weeks 2019 series and is offered to our 335,000 alumni around the globe. Throughout your career, BU is committed to helping you define and achieve your professional goals, and we aim to do this by providing alumni with access to a series of valuable online tools and social media communities. I know that we have alumni joining us today from some very far away places. We had alumni sign up from a couple places in China, Bogota, Colombia, Madrid, London, Greece, Dublin, Morocco, Peoria, Arizona, Aurora, Colorado, Chicago, Brick, New Jersey, St. Paul, Minnesota, Portland, Oregon, and as always, dozens of Massachusetts alumni from towns like Brookline, Hubbardston, Malden, Natick, Pocasset, Swampscott, and more. For each and every one of you out there, please know that we really do value your participation in this program. Before I introduce today's speaker, some brief housekeeping notes. As you know by now, this webinar is being offered on our Zoom online meeting platform. If you experience any trouble with the audio or visual portions of today's presentation, I'll ask that you please contact Zoom directly. I apologize, the number on your screen is wrong. If you have any trouble, contact Zoom support at 1-888-799-9666. That number again, if you want to write it down, 1-888-799-9666. Today's presentation is being recorded and will soon be made available for on-demand viewing on the BU Alumni Association website, which you can find at www.bu.edu/alumni. Our speaker today is very eager to answer any questions you have, and you're welcome to submit them throughout the presentation using the Q&A function. If you hover over the top or bottom of your screen, you should see a little menu pop up, select Q&A, and then you can go ahead and type in your question. We look to hopefully answer as many questions as we can today, so feel free to enter them whenever they come up. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the day, BU Questrom School of Business MBA alumna Dina Shapiro. Dina began her career at top global marketing agencies such as BBDO and JWT, building iconic brands such as MasterCard, Kleenex, Campbell's Soup, Weight Watchers, and Excedrin. She then parlayed her agency-side experience to senior marketing positions at Fortune 125 companies, Citi, and Alcoa. She was an entrepreneur in corporate environments, proactively driving innovative marketing initiatives that won multiple awards, including a Gold Effie and a Cannes Lion. In 2013, Dina founded Yorkville Consulting to focus on her passion to teach people how to be world-class marketers. Some of her teaching topics include, as we're here for today, team building for marketers, customer decision journey, brand strategy, integrated marketing, client agency relationships, and lead generation. I should mention here, Dina has done a webinar for us before about lead generation. You can find it on our website, the 8-step roadmap to lead generation. Dina's clients are mostly Fortune 500 companies. Her business has achieved year-over-year increases in gross profit and net income. As I mentioned, Dina has her MBA from BU and also a bachelor's in economics from George Washington in Washington, D.C. Dina, thank you so much for doing this for us. I always appreciate you having time to be one of our speakers. I'll go ahead and ask you to get your slide deck up and running, and then the floor is all yours.
Okay, Jeff, how's that looking?
Perfect.
Good, good. Okay, welcome everybody to Team Building Skills for Marketers. We will jump right in. So today's organizations, they are matrix, they are complicated. So they require consensus building, not only within marketing teams, but between marketers and other disciplines like business units, research, product development, legal, finance. So to be an effective marketer, you really have to master the art and science of working well with your team. So that's your close-in marketing team, but also your extended team across disciplines. So the importance of being a team player, right? We live in a VUCA world, and VUCA is an acronym for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And as a result of living in this VUCA world, many organizations have a consensus building culture. And sometimes it's for a good reason, like respecting diversity of thought. And other times it's for not such a good reason, like somebody who wants to, avoid accountability. But either way, we live in a consensus building culture. It's really a reality and one that is likely here to stay. So one implication is that executives are more likely to approve recommendations or budgets that are supported by a team, projects that are supported by a team versus one individual. And another implication is that a strong team encourages healthy risk-taking to get to the best solutions for the organization and all the stakeholders. So what are the benefits of being a team player? Well, you'll feel more connected, more engaged. It promotes the art of influence versus one person telling or dictating to somebody else what they should do. You'll establish strong relationships and a strong support network. And being a team player really leads to a better work output due to the collective wisdom and diversity of thought. You can all share best practices, case studies, and examples. You can leverage each person's strengths. A team can work through much more complicated, difficult problems together. And you definitely have a better chance to advance your career because knowing how to work well with other people is a critical skill, not only to obtain a leadership position, but to maintain that leadership position. So I love this acronym. I didn't write it, but team, together everyone achieves more. Great way to think about it. So let's summarize today's learning objectives. I'll start by talking about different personality styles and how to work with different personality styles. Then we'll talk about responsibility charting, what that is, how to use it. Collaboration versus cooperation. Many people think they're collaborating when they're really not. We'll talk about conflict resolution. We all experience this, but how do we resolve conflicts? We'll talk about dialogue versus debate, how to share your point of view effectively. An after-action review process, I'll define that and talk about how you can get something up and running. And then we'll summarize with key takeaways. So let's jump into different personality styles. And what I'd like to remind people is that you don't always get to choose your team or your colleagues. And some people think this really only happens at work, but it happens in your personal life too. You don't get to choose your in-laws or your kid's teacher, right? So, what are the stages of group development? And you can go online and search. There are lots of different frameworks out there, but I'd like to share with you, this is my favorite model, which was created by Tuckman. And it goes like this. So the first stage is when the team forms, and people don't really know each other yet, and goals may not really be aligned. The second stage is storm, and this can be pretty disruptive time when people don't listen to one another and they're very focused on their own individual objectives. It could be a really stressful stage when people lack tolerance and lack patience. Next is the norm stage, when people, they start to listen, they start to align objectives. And one possible problem at this stage is that people can get stuck here because they don't really articulate their point of view because they're so afraid of reverting back to that storm stage. So really, the last stage, perform, is the ideal place. This is where people really listen and articulate their point of view diplomatically and have shared objectives. So let's talk a little bit about introvert and extrovert. I know a lot of people have heard this and they believe they're defining it correctly, but the truth is that with introvert and extrovert, it's really defined as where we get our energy from, how we recharge. And people are not 100% one or the other. We very often have tendencies of both, but we tend to have a tendency of one over the other in most situations. So if you tend to be more of an introvert, you tend to recharge by spending time alone, okay? And when you're around a lot of people, right, for a long period of time, you can actually lose energy. Whereas extroverts tend to recharge by being around a lot of other people. They gain energy from other people, and they actually find that their energy is drained when they spend too much time alone. So I want to give you guys a moment just to kind of think on your own. And you can just read this first row, this blue row, and just think about whether these statements generally apply to you or not. So not every single word in every box, but what you're seeing here, do these things generally apply to you? Do you tend to be more reserved? Do you tend to be more comfortable alone? Do you prefer to know just a few people but know them really well? Okay. Or you can read the bottom green row and think about whether these statements generally apply to you. If you're seen as an outgoing person, if you're comfortable in groups, if you have a wide range of friends, right? So if you feel that the blue row is what you tend to identify with more, your tendency would be more toward an introvert. And if the green row, more toward an extrovert. So let's talk about some tips to work with either personality style. So let's say you're working with an introvert. You need to respect their need for privacy. You need to let them observe first in new situations. Don't ask them to speak too quickly before they're ready. Definitely give them time to think. They need time to process. And allow them to finish their thought without interrupting. Very often an introvert can be a little more quiet while they're processing things. So when they do speak up, they are definitely ready to share their thoughts, so don't interrupt them. Give them advance notice of changes. Okay, you want to provide feedback one-on-one. And let them find colleagues with similar abilities versus trying to force them into that type of circumstance. Now let's say you need to work with an extrovert. So what are some tips to work with extroverts? Well, you need to respect their independence, compliment them in the company of others. They love that. They can get really enthusiastic, so you need to accept that and encourage it. Allow them to explore. Extroverts tend to think out loud, so let them talk things out. Let them dive right in. Offer them lots of options and let them shine. So let's move on now to responsibility charting. So what is responsibility charting? Well, it's a process that helps you identify ambiguities, and it highlights different points of view and perspectives, and then it resolves those ambiguities and those differences through a cross-functional or a cross-discipline type of collaborative effort. So what are the benefits of responsibility charting? Well, it engages people across levels, across disciplines, people with different tenure at the organization. And accountability is placed with the right person. I mean, no one person can be accountable for 100% of a project, every step within a project, right? So accountability with the right person. And it's a very systematic way to have a dialogue, laying out the specific steps within a process and which discipline should be responsible at each step of that process. And it helps define relationships. So what are the communications that need to happen across the disciplines on the team? What are the actions required? And the great thing is that it really helps depersonalize. So in other words, instead of somebody being assigned a particular step in a project because the boss likes them, or a lot of people like them, or somebody not getting work because they may be a little more quiet, people don't know them. This is really focused on the discipline. What's the right discipline to be involved at each step? And also responsibility charting, this is a really important point. It helps reconcile role conceptions and expectations. And let me explain what I mean here. So role conception is what a person thinks their job is, meaning what somebody's been taught to do. Now the problem is that it might be influenced by maybe a title that doesn't really capture what that role is, or maybe just things that the person in the job did before. Then there's a role expectation. And this is about what other people in the organization think the person's responsible for. And the challenge here is that this also can be influenced by incorrect information. Maybe this is the way somebody did it at a former job, but that's not the way it's done here. Or very often, we can have inconsistent direction from the boss or the boss's boss, and that can really affect the role expectation. And then role behavior is what a person actually does in their job. So responsibility charting really reconciles conceptions and expectations so behavior can become much more productive and predictable. So how do you kickstart the process? Responsibility charting, this takes hours and hours to do, but I'll give you some tips for how to kickstart the process. So the first thing is there are lots of different frameworks for responsibility charting. A lot of people have heard of RACI, which I'll explain in a moment. And I'm going to go with that one for this webinar, but you can definitely search online, look for different frameworks, or you can take various frameworks and develop one that works best for your organization. So RACI does tend to be a really popular one. And RACI stands for responsible, accountable, consult, and inform. So somebody who's responsible, that's like the doer. That's the person who completes the task. It could be one person, or it could be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or more people who can have that designated responsibility at a particular step. Accountable, that's, the buck stops here, right? So that's the person who ultimately has the answer. They have yes, no, veto authority. If you're consulted, that means you're in the loop. Okay, that's usually a subject matter expert. And this is somebody who is definitely consulted prior to a final decision being made. So this is a two-way communication. And the last is informed, somebody who's kept in the picture. The decision's already made, the action's already taken, so they're informed after the fact. So this is a one-way communication. So responsibility charting. Here's a 5-step process. The first step is to identify the work process. What are the steps involved? This is like Goldilocks. You don't want too few steps. You don't want too many steps. So depending on your business and the nature of what you're doing, can average anywhere between 10 and 25 steps. Then you need to determine all of the activities that need to happen. And as you're outlining these, try to not do things that are obvious or generic, a step like schedule a meeting. Okay, and you want to try to begin each step with a really good action verb to be clear. Then next, you want to think about each discipline that needs to be involved at each step. So this is definitely cross-discipline, it's across groups. And again, you want to, this is a great step to really depersonalize things and keep it objective. Think about the discipline as opposed to the specific person. Then you would develop your RACI chart or whatever framework you're using. If you are using RACI, it's usually helpful to start with the R's and the A's. That's the people who are responsible and accountable, and then move forward with the people who are consulted or informed. Now, this might be something that your team can do on your own. If it's a more complex project or something larger, you might need a facilitator. And you might have some really good internal people. I always recommend look at your internal resources first. Maybe somebody who's a great facilitator, who's great at being objective, and they can help you out. And if you don't have that, you can always go to an external facilitator. And last is you definitely need to get feedback and buy-in from all of the people who are involved. Because if you don't get the buy-in, then they're just not going to follow the process. Okay. Let's move on to collaboration versus cooperation. So, as I discussed earlier, it's a very, complex business market. So collaboration is really necessary to compete. But, I recognize it's a lot easier said than done. Okay? Collaboration is not the dominant person in the room saying, hey, just do it my way. Some really good starting points are just everybody. It's about the mindset. It's about having a genuine willingness to really work together, share information. So those are starting points, but true collaboration is really all of that and more. And collaboration, it can require some really tough decisions that have to be made, and nothing's perfect in life, so there are always going to be some trade-offs. So let's look at this a little more specifically, because very often people with the best of intentions, they think that they're collaborating, but what they're really doing is only cooperating. So cooperation is a lot easier. Collaboration is harder, but worth it. Cooperation is when people exchange information in support of their own individual goals. Whereas collaboration is really a collective team effort where you're creating something in support of a shared goal. Cooperation is when each individual person has the responsibility to solve a specific part of the problem. Collaboration is a much more synchronized kind of group effort to construct a shared solution. Cooperation is when each individual really kind of controls their own territory, whereas collaboration, people have to have the confidence to give up a little bit of control, and each individual knows when to kind of fall on a sword for a particular point of view versus when to back down. Cooperation is expertise by silo. Collaboration really requires respecting each subject matter expert in the group and respecting the trust and openness to diversity of thought. Cooperation, yeah, I'll give you information. You know, it's like if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. If you help me, I'll help you. Whereas collaboration is much more about aligning resources with the company goals and having a synchronized approach to developing strategies. So what are the benefits of collaboration? Well, you definitely engage people and you create a sense of community amongst everybody who's on the team. And you get multiple perspectives to really validate ideas and solve problems. Each individual learns more and retains more. And studies show that in 97% of circumstances, collaboration will positively affect the outcome of a project. So let's talk about some collaboration best practices. First, don't rely 100% on emails. I know it's really tempting. We all have so many meetings, we have so many projects going on, but really try to communicate live whenever possible. Use responsibility charting. Ask questions to clarify anything that's unclear or inconsistent from leadership. Very often we feel inhibited when we're not clear on something from a leader. You know, we're afraid it might make us seem stupid or we weren't listening, but really the smartest thing you can do is go back to that person and get clarification. Get to know your colleagues and their strengths so you can leverage each individual's strengths on the team. Be confident about your position. You know, very often we're afraid to collaborate because, you know, we're afraid that maybe we'll lose our job, somebody will take our job, or they'll be promoted before us. But really be confident about your contributions. That's a really good first step to collaboration. Give everyone on the team equal floor time. Every team, there are certain people who love to jump in there and start talking first, and there are other people who kind of feel like they can't get a word in edgewise. So make sure that each meeting has somebody who will facilitate to make sure that everybody gets equal floor time. Embrace change, don't be afraid of it. So collaboration process framework. I'll share a few steps and things to consider as you're working on this. So the first step is a kickoff, and this is where you really map out high level, what's the process, and you get into responsibility timing. You determine if a budget's needed, you just develop a schedule. And I'm a big fan of obtaining an executive sponsor. This is somebody who's on the executive team, you know, top senior level, who will help you make sure that whatever you're doing is aligned with the direction of the company. They can help you with who should be involved. And when it goes to getting buy-in, you've got somebody on the executive team who's got some skin in the game and who can help you. Next, you'll convene a working session. This is all the people who need to be involved across disciplines, and you develop that collaboration contract, that document. It could just be a simple few bullet points. It could be a page. This is where everybody really commits to collaboration. Next is to set objectives. Again, this is at a group level. This is not just about one individual. And you want to make the cross-discipline team accountable for the performance, not just one individual. Next, big fan of simplifying. Okay, go through your process, go through everything you've just worked on, and make sure you're just focusing on what's relevant, and make sure to simplify the steps. Go for speed, agility, and efficiency. And last, think about behavioral changes. Stay really laser focused on collaboration. And you may need to work with your executive sponsor to determine how the company can invest in the capabilities, meaning collaboration capabilities, so that you can sustain this over time. Okay, so let's move on to conflict resolution. What are the common reasons for conflict? Different people have different goals or ideas. Somebody's not listening to the other person, or responding to somebody's ideas or questions in an unproductive, negative kind of way. People not having the information they need. That's a real cause for conflict. Different personality styles, like we discussed, and not knowing how to work with a personality style that's different from your own. Fear of change. Internal power struggles. Competition for resources. Every company, big or small, has limited resources, so people competing for them. Lack of responsibility charting. This is a big one. Previous unresolved conflicts that feed into new conflicts. And one person just looking at the other and thinking or saying, you're just not doing what I want you to do. So I'm sure a lot of these sound familiar, the common reasons for conflict. So to make you feel a little bit better, you are not alone. Okay, 85% of employees experience conflict. People spend on average almost 3 hours a week dealing with conflict. Companies spend close to $360 billion worth of hours to try to resolve employee conflict. In 73% of occasions, a conflict morphs into a personal attack. And 75% of the time, people are avoiding conflict. It results in sickness or absence from work. So you're not alone if you are experiencing conflict. But let's talk about, there are really two different types of conflict. There's destructive conflict. Believe it or not, there is actually constructive conflict. So let's break this down. Destructive conflict is when you have some sort of a disagreement and it leads to a negative outcome. People feel frustrated, they feel irritated, and there's a lot of antagonism. Whereas constructive conflict, the disagreement is resolved in a positive manner that benefits both parties. Destructive conflict harms relationships, whereas constructive conflict can actually strengthen a relationship. I mean, you guys, may have had situations like this where you have a conflict and you work it through, and the team is actually better off if you've worked it through in a constructive kind of way. Destructive conflict, neither party benefits, whereas constructive conflict, it's a win-win situation. Both parties benefit. Destructive conflict, there's either no communication or unproductive or negative communication, whereas constructive conflict is very open and honest communication. Destructive conflict reduces employees' performance, whereas constructive conflict improves it. And destructive conflict, people can't see that both parties need to be involved, whereas constructive conflict, both parties are involved to resolve the issue. So let's talk about some different conflict resolution styles. Here's the first one, the accommodating conflict resolution style. This is the person who says, hey, it's okay, with me, whatever you want. The pros, it definitely preserves harmony. And this is somebody who can admit, hey, there might be a better way than what I've thought of. The cons, it can lead to some resentment because this person can feel that their needs are not met. It can diminish the influence, the perception of influence that that person may have, and it can also be perceived as maybe somebody taking a martyr stance. The next style is competing. That's the person who says, my way or the highway. The pros, this is a person who is decisive, this person is assertive, and certainly that person's individual needs are met. The cons, it can be really damaging to relationships and other people can start to shut down. And there's the avoidance style. This is the person who says, oh, let's think about it tomorrow. The pros, this is somebody who doesn't sweat the small stuff. And sometimes delays can be useful if somebody needs just a little more thinking time. The cons, the avoidance can build up over time and then blow, kind of like a volcano. Maybe important issues are not dealt with. And sometimes it can take more energy to actually avoid something than to address it head on. And the next conflict resolution style is the person who's the compromiser. This is the person who always wants to make a deal. So the pros are this person can fix things quickly and can find temporary resolutions to some pretty complex issues. The cons, the person might be perceived as a little bit of a game player and maybe somebody who's bypassing a longer term solution. So the conflict resolution style I recommend, I'm sure this will come as a huge shock to you all, is to collaborate, right? And the idea here is that multiple heads are better than one. The pros, find the best solution for everybody, which very often, most of the time, leads to higher commitment by everybody on the team, a much higher level of creativity to solve problems, and team building. Cons, I can't think of any, but when we get to Q&A, if anybody here can think of a con, by all means, let me know. Okay, so a 3-step process to resolve conflict. The first step is to recognize there's a problem that needs to be solved. If you don't know that a problem exists, you can't solve it. The second step is to explore the underlying concerns. What's the reason for the problem? And third is to create a mutually agreeable solution. So some requirements here. Everybody needs to stay collaborative in a collaborative state of mind, meaning you have to sit on the same side of the table. You can't flip into a hostile stance or be oppositional. And you got to try to stay objective, right? You want to check your emotions at the door. So here's an example. Meet Steve and Lorraine. Those are my parents' names, by the way. And let's say that we're in step 1 where they need to recognize that there's a problem to solve. So Steve says, hey, let's take a trip someplace new, far away. I want to travel and explore. Lorraine says, not me. That sounds awful. I love to stay at home. When I have time off from work, the last thing I want to do is travel. So we recognize there's a problem here to solve. Step 2, explore the underlying concerns. What's the reason for the problem? Steve says, I was thinking of a big trip because I want to do some really active stuff outside. At work, I'm sitting at my desk all day. I want to take hikes and do fun and invigorating things. Lorraine says, oh, I understand, but for me, I prefer just one place where we can chill out. I want to relax. I want to slow down. I want to recuperate. So step 3, creating a mutually agreeable solution. Steve says, so I want to be able to move around a lot, and you want to be able to relax. How about a beach resort? You can chill at the beach. I can surf and explore. We can stay in that one place rather than move around, which you would prefer. And Lorraine says, sounds perfect. It's a deal. So you might want to practice this 3-step process in a simple kind of personal situation to get comfortable with the steps, and then you can apply it to a more complex business situation. Okay, let's move on to dialogue versus debate. So the origin of the word debate, the Middle English derivative, is to beat. I don't know about you, but I certainly don't want to beat somebody else, and you don't want to feel beaten, right? So I always say opt for dialogue over debate. So let's look at each one of these. Debate, by definition, is oppositional. You have 2 opposing sides. One is trying to prove the other one wrong. In a debate, when somebody's listening, it's with the objective to find a flaw, to find a difference, and have a counter argument. Debate, there's only one right answer. It's very closed-minded, and each party is seeking closure to win the debate. Dialogue's very different. Dialogue is listening with a different objective. It's to understand and find common ground. Dialogue is much more enlarging and the possibility of changing a participant's point of view. Dialogue is finding the best solution together. It's being very open-minded and seeking new options. So, opt for dialogue over debate. Okay, let's move on to some tips to share your point of view effectively. So, the first is you want to share your perspective intelligently, concisely, and persuasively. Okay? In these consensus building cultures, people very often need to persuade somebody who may not just be ranked below them, but might be a peer or somebody ranked above them. And everybody feels like they have 1,000 projects and they're running from meeting to meeting, so you definitely want to share your point of view concisely. Use the art of influence, because again, in these consensus building cultures, it's not just somebody who you can tell what to do. So you have to influence other people. And make sure to back up your point of view with facts. Now today we have so much data, it's almost like we don't know what to do with it. So you don't want to over data people, okay? You want to bring in the relevant, concise facts that support the point of view. And I'd like to talk about mindfulness. And a lot of people think of mindfulness with spiritual or religious implications. I'm going to talk about strictly with the application to marketers as you're building your team skills, right? So you want to be present in the dialogue. You want to be open. You want to listen non-judgmentally and respect diversity of thought. So what I mean here is, if somebody's just not talking while the other person is talking, but they're busy thinking of their response, that's not being mindful. So the idea is to really be present, listen non-judgmentally, and be open and respect what you're hearing. It doesn't mean you have to agree with somebody, but you want to be mindful to at least hear their point of view so you can consider it in an open sort of way. One of my favorite quotes by Frank Zappa, a mind is like a parachute. It doesn't work unless it's open. Okay, so your mind works best when it is open. Okay, let's move on to the after action review. So what is this? It's basically a structured kind of process to debrief after the end of a project. And you analyze what was supposed to happen, what actually happened, what went well and why, and what can be improved and why. So what are the benefits of an after-action review? Well, you will learn and be able to optimize, like what worked well in this campaign and how we developed it and how can we do better in the future. You'll get closure on the past. Remember we said one of the most common reasons for conflict is when a previous conflict has not been resolved and it gets brought into another project. So you get closure on the past so you can focus on the future. And it eliminates recreating the wheel. So some best practices of an after-action review. You need to have an open and honest, objective, professional discussion. Everybody who worked on the project has to participate in the after-action review. And focus on the results of this specific project. Don't start bringing in things that happened from other projects. Keep it focused. Identifies ways to sustain what happened that worked really well and develop recommendations to overcome obstacles. So there are lots of templates out there for an after-action review. You can search online. But here are some examples of what could be in a starter template. Who was on the project? What did they do? What was the objective of the project? What went well and why? How to maintain that success? What didn't go well and why? You definitely want a clear summary of actionable recommendations, anything that requires leadership attention, and how you're going to share this report with either the project sponsor or the appropriate leader. And remember, depersonalize it all. So some tips to make an after-action review a living practice. You want to schedule them consistently to learn both from successes and failures. You want to gather all the relevant facts and figures related to the team's performance. Make participation mandatory. Anybody who was involved and worked on the project must be involved. And sometimes it's not just people on the internal team. It could be external customers or partners or suppliers or vendors. Follow the rules of engagement, okay? You definitely want to share joint learning, but make sure to respect individual comments and keep those confidential. So let's summarize with some key takeaways. Huckman stages of group development, right? We have form, storm, norm, perform. You want to bypass storm as quickly as possible. Be mindful and respectful of different personality and communication styles between extroverts and introverts. Implement responsibility charting. This will clarify expectations. Make sure you're collaborating, not just cooperating. Use constructive conflict, not destructive conflict. Opt for dialogue over debate. be open and non-judgmental, and develop an after-action review template with cross-discipline feedback to get the buy-in. So what I would recommend before you leave today's webinar and go on to your next meeting, take a little time for some individual kind of learning reflection. What did you learn today and what you will do differently? So with that, say thank you. You're welcome to contact me we did a very quick kind of 30-40 minute webinar here, but there's a full day workshop that I can bring this on site to your company. And for BU alumni, I do offer a discount. So I will say thank you, and I'll hit back to Jeff to see if we have any questions.
Amazing, Dina. Thank you. While we're waiting for questions to come in, I have a couple points I want to address. One, kudos to you for being the first person to use Frank Zappa as a inspirational model on one of our BU webinars. That gets you extra points in my book. Two, it definitely occurred to me as you were doing this presentation that what a tough job you had. You know, those sort of 8 elements that made up your presentation today, each one of those could have been its own hour-long webinar. And so you really were just giving sort of a brief overview on something that I think a lot of people really want to dive in on. I did want to ask you, and folks, please use this opportunity to ask Dina any questions you have. What is it that you think specifically about the marketing industry or marketing teams, marketing companies that makes it harder to do some of the best practices that you're talking about today? I mean, you've worked in the field for a really long time, and I know you have a lot of experience to draw on. How is marketing different from other industries where maybe it isn't quite as difficult to build that high-performing, norming team?
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is, you know, people who work in other disciplines, you know, marketing is perceived as a fun thing to do. And it is. That's why I've worked, you know, with it for so long. And everybody sort of fancies themselves a marketer. So I think a lot of people want to be involved in the marketing process. So it's that much more important for marketers to understand how in a positive way to leverage that interest and the expertise, you know, in a relevant kind of appropriate way. I think also, you know, years ago, before any of us were even born, right? You know, first you only had newspaper or you only had radio, and then TV came along, you know, and hop ahead a few decades, and then you have all these digital touch points. So I think that you have so many more people working in marketing, and there are so many disciplines within marketing that you just have more and more people. It's like it takes a village to even get the smallest tactical campaign out the door. So the importance of collaboration, you know, is not only within the sort of close-in marketing team, but also the extended marketing team and the extended team within the company. And then very often marketers have, you know, external partners like an agency or maybe you have a sports sponsorship with a local team. So there just tend to be so many people, you know, involved in marketing that you really need to know how to work effectively with a team.
It's interesting. I think so much of what you talked about today, while you had that marketing lens on it, was applicable to anything. I'll be honest, as a sports fan, I was thinking specifically about what's happening with the Boston Celtics right now, who should be this high-performing team. We're having all these struggles because of a lot of the things that you highlighted today. I think we should have the Celtics fly you over to Boston for an afternoon to do this workshop with them. Xenia, or Xenia, sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. I know you're dialing in from Athens today, saying, first, thank you for a great webinar. Asking if we can go back in your presentation to the slide right before the after action review. Xenia, if you've got a specific question about that, it'd be great if you wanted to chat in, but let's take a look and see if you can catch up on.
Is this the slide?
I'm guessing that it would be, but Xenia, definitely let us know. Another question's come in from Margaret. Xenia, we'll get to you in a second. If you want to be a little bit more specific, that'd be helpful. Margaret's asking if, in your time working in marketing, what's the biggest team building challenge you've ever had?
Well, I think that usually happens when, you know, when a very new senior person comes on board, and let's say your team dynamic was working beautifully, and that person, they feel like they're sort of pulling the rug out from underneath you, and you definitely need to deploy your skills in change management, and sometimes I think it's really hard when, a senior leader is not clear about what they're looking for, or if there are conflicting directions between different leaders, or if, let's say, a couple people on the executive team, they're not getting on well. It can make it very difficult.
Great, thank you. Xenia, I'm going to recommend maybe shoot an email to Dina here, who kindly given her email address, and maybe you can follow up directly about whatever your question was about which slide. You're also asking, is there going to be a replay? Yes, this webinar was recorded, and we'll be putting it along on our website along with Dina's other webinar that she did for us previously, the 8-step roadmap to lead generation. You'll be able to find both of those on our website at bu.edu/alumni. Dina, that's all the questions we have today. Again, I know you had to go pretty quickly over a lot of material. I really appreciate your time today, and thank you so much for everything that you've done for BU.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
I also want to thank all of you for joining us. I specifically want to thank those of you who've donated to BU and supported us financially. We couldn't do this work without your help. I want to make sure that you all know we've got an incredible slate of webinars this month as part of Alumni Career Weeks 2019. We've got a month-long series of in-person workshops, panel discussions, networking events, and these online webinars happening all through the month of March online and in cities around the globe. Check out our website specifically for Career Weeks. It's bu.edu/Career Weeks. You can see the full menu of opportunities happening in a city near you, and you can sign up right there. As always, if you or any BU alum you know would be interested in hosting a Industry Insiders webinar like this one, or a professional development career webinar for the alumni office, please contact me at jtmurphy@bu.edu. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Have a great day or a great evening. And Dina, thanks one more time.
Thanks, guys.